the fourth session of today and the final session of today. This conference entitled Defense Strategies of Small States and Small Forces. This is the fifth edition of this conference convened by the Strategic Studies Unit. So this last session, which is the culmination of all the efforts that have been made during the day and comes straight after the lunch break. So perhaps we would need a cup of coffee to be energetic enough and take this session, particularly that the topic of this session is going to be about this region, the region where we have this particular center, the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. So the title of this session is Securing the Gulf, Multi-Domain Adaptation and Innovations. So we have different cases from different countries of the GCC. Some of the countries in the region are considered small states. These states have contributed to discussion of this topic, particularly when it comes to international relations. We're going to have 4 researchers with us in this session who are specialized in the field, coming from different countries in the region that have academic title. And also we have Dr. Talab Alfleej, Dr. Mohammed bin Saeed Al-Futaisi, Dr. Khalifa Al-Kuwari, and Dr. Rashid Al-Mohanadi. So I'm going to follow the same order as per the agenda. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Talab Alfleej, Kuwait's defense strategy towards a military doctrine that defeats challenges. We would like to welcome you, Mr. Talab, so who is a lieutenant general, and he was part of the Joint Command, and he is in the military school, and also he was in Ali As-Salah, and also he is a graduate of the Kuwaiti Military School, and he has got a master's from the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom. So this is where Norbert Elias used to teach. It is a renowned university. He's got a bachelor degree in geography from the University of Kuwait, and he has participated in a number of military exercises in the United Kingdom, and also he works on political ideology when it comes to the different Arab military factions. So this is going to be the title of his paper, Kuwait's Defense Strategy Towards a Military Doctrine That Defeats Challenges. So you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you, Dr. Haider, for the introduction. At the outset, I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and also I would like to thank the Strategic Studies Unit for the kind invitation, for the good organization. Would like to thank them for inviting us, and I hope that my presentation is going to be in keeping with the value and the importance of this strategic unit. So talking about small states, because I would like to start with my presentation talking about defense strategies of small states. So there are different concepts. Are they small in terms of population, in terms of size, in terms of human, military, economic resources or capabilities, or all of these aspects together? These kind of denominations based on the size or the population. So there are some researchers that consider states to be small because the population is a small population, and many small states have lethal weapons. But when it comes to the real standards that should be taken into account in deciding whether the country is small or not, these are small countries. They cannot defend themselves on their own without entering into alliances with other countries. And we have seen in recent years how countries had lethal weapons, but those countries are considered small states because they were not able to go beyond the strategic and operational and tactical challenges. So the Kuwaiti defense strategy, Kuwait is one of the small states or even micro-states. So the total population and the size of the state, we consider Kuwait one of the smallest countries worldwide, and also one of the smallest countries in the region. So in terms of the total population and also the geography of the country. So there are neighboring countries that are much larger, and for Kuwait, it should adopt a kind of a military doctrine that has a tactical kind of perspective, but it should have a strategic objective. So my lecture, ladies and gentlemen, I thought that I would be allocated 40 minutes, but I'm going to be as brief as I can because I do not want this to be at the expense of the content that I would like to deliver to you here. So Kuwait, as you can see before you in the screen, is surrounded by much larger countries such as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which constitutes the geographical depth, the historical and military depth of Kuwait. It is 120 times bigger than Kuwait. So Kuwait constitutes 1% of the size of Saudi Arabia. And Iraq is 25 times bigger and larger than Kuwait. And the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is one of the neighboring countries beyond the GCC, and also it is a neighboring countries with whom we share social and Islamic values. It is 92 times larger than Kuwait. So Kuwait constitutes a little bit more than 1% of the total size of Kuwait. So consequently, what are the challenges? We have strategic challenges, that is right, in terms of size. So Kuwait is a very, very small country compared to its neighboring countries. It is an open country, does not have a local geographical depth. So this is one of the biggest challenges that we face. It is a flat territory and it has a small population as well. So this is one also of the challenges. And we do not have any kind of hurdles for any enemies to make it to the Kuwaiti territories. Also limited military and human capabilities is also one of the obstacles that Kuwait faces. We have operational and tactical challenges that we're going to talk about in the coming slides. So even persons who do not have a military experience would be able to understand the strategic and the operational challenges that Kuwait faces when we talk about the operations and military tactical perspective. So we have this theater of operation, and on the left we have also another map which is another theater of operation, and you can here see the large territories, thousands of square meters in terms of width and length. And can you imagine here the size of Kuwait compared to this operational environment? When the operation is a joint operation, so we talk about many joint operation areas in many areas in this theater, and you can imagine also the size of operations when it comes to operational and tactical operations. Within this kind of area, there are areas of responsibility, number one, area of responsibility, number of two, and so on and so forth. So all of these things show the size of small countries for them to be able to survive in this very huge kind of territory. So if Kuwait subdues any operation within the region, it is going to be subjected to direct impact when it comes to vital areas, sovereign areas, all of them would be impacted. Kuwait, in terms of size, represents a tactical operation that would enable the different forces to carry out direct and indirect maneuvers. And here you can see the description before you in the coming slide. And there are some areas of interest that are part of the, they are not outside this geography, and here we're talking about areas of interest that the joint operations commander would be interested in a certain specific area in terms if there are any kind of neutral area or a possible or a potential enemy, because these are the areas that would be of interest to the operation commander. So to continue with this strategy, what do we want in the current circumstances? We have to have a comprehensive strategic environment starting from the higher interests of the state. And here we have the general strategy of the state, public strategy in terms of economy, diplomacy, health, defense, security, and so on and so forth. Part of this strategy we would have a strategic strategy that the military apparatus would implement on the ground by following instructions and guidelines in keeping with the higher strategy of the state. For instance, what do you want to achieve in the coming 30 years? And here we divide this duration into a number of periods of time, maybe 5 years, and each phase would have a number of goals. This strategic vision should be revisited continuously, should be updated, and should include the emergency plans or as it is said in those strategies, contingency plans. So what are the proposed steps that should be taken into account in order to increase the level of professionalism? So I talk about 3 pillars when it comes to this particular strategy. We have human capabilities, we have armaments, and also training, in my personal humble view. And this is what I would like to talk about in the coming phase of my presentation. So human forces, so we have to know the target groups that we would like to integrate in the military establishment. Do we need youth, always youth, high school graduates and university graduates? Can we expand the circle and include perhaps other citizens, other technicians and academics that would cover a certain age group, an age group that would be in keeping with this policy, and that includes these different phases of 5 years and so on and so forth. And also we have to observe and give the possibility and the flexibility to have a temporary kind of contract, because we would like them to have a future within the military establishment and also a future within other establishments as well. Also, we have to integrate individuals in all training programs, internal and external. So individuals normally only undertake internal training, and they are not given the opportunity to have training sessions and outside the state for them to be able to rub shoulders with other countries, other military forces much advanced forces for them to be able to train and to be beneficial to their own military establishment. So we have to have also an adequate training for those who have basic certificates, school degrees or certificates. They have to have technical training in keeping with their academic or school capabilities, and these capabilities should be developed day after day, month after month, and year after year. We have to have real program in order to indicate the real number of officers. We should not have the number of officers beyond what we need in our armed forces. And we cannot also have below our need when it comes to the armed forces, because we need to take certain decisions within a certain framework, and also to take into account the capabilities of certain persons within a certain period of time. So if we have a larger number of people beyond what we want, it would not be useful. And also the same applies to having a number of officers below what we need. Also, I would like to talk about armament. So what are the goals, the real goals of armament? So armament would lead to deterrence and also would enable us to support the sovereignty and protect the sovereignty of the state, and also to protect our borders, to protect our state, and also to guarantee prosperity and stability in the state. So we have to be clear-cut about the objectives of our state. Also, we have to develop sophisticated weapons. So we have to know what weapons we need, the adequate weapons for this open kind of territory. We have also to understand the nature of any potential threat that might arise. Are these enemies close, nearby, or far away? We have to be specific about the potential threats that our territories can be subjected to. We need to have an understanding of the regional and global circumstances. Also, we have to have training programs about the different weapons, and also we have to diversify our resources and sources. We cannot rely on one source, because maybe today you're in good terms and your interests intersect, but at some other point, perhaps you wouldn't be in good terms with that particular country, and that is why you need to guarantee your interests without impacting your strategic interest. And also, when it comes to new technologies, my colleagues talked about this particular term, and talking about cyber warfare, artificial intelligence, and also the use of drones. There are many countries worldwide that can cater for such kind of services. We have to have industrial capabilities, and also I would like to talk about training. So we have to have a long-term policy depending on our needs, and we have to have specific phases whereby we indicate our needs and the current specializations that we need. And also we have to have long-term and short-term kind of interests, and also to include people with high potential from an academic and military perspectives. When we try to have these plans, we have to include all qualified persons from a strategic perspective, from a defense perspective, and from a security perspective, for us to be able to reach our objectives. And also we have to understand the situation. For us to delineate a clear-cut strategy, we have to understand and raise awareness when it comes to the geopolitical and security changes in the country. And before I conclude, we have to have programs and also to train our personnel on a long term for them to be the thinkers that would take over after 20 years and delineate the plans. And also we have to have all the capabilities, and also we have to have what is called CBX and TFX exercises and maneuvers, where the forces would participate in command and military exercises, and also try to get the help of civilians as well, and also to secure cybersecurity center, and also we have to include cyber military security that would include the different kind of centers, and also to have a particular center for strategic and operational strategies and plans. We have to have a number of plans on the shelf that would take into account what is expected and what is not foreseen. And also we have to train commanders that have the capability in order to achieve the aim. So the challenges that small states face are huge, and we have to have an understanding of the regional environment, and also we need to have elitist capabilities, meticulous training, and also to have reconnaissance training, and also we have to have sophisticated weapons that would enable us to achieve deterrence, and also the need to respond to any strategic needs that might arise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Talab, and thank you for respecting the time limit. And you summarized the Kuwaiti defense strategies. Uh, of course, you're speaking from experience. Now we move to the second paper from Kuwait to Oman. We have Dr. Muhammad bin Saeed Al-Futaisi. He will be talking about Oman's strategic resilience, and he is a professor at Brahmi University. He holds a PhD in forensic law, and also his research interests focus on military counterterrorism, and also he published 3 books in the last 3 years, including Defensive Counterterrorism Toward a Proactive Management of Crises and Terrorist Threats, and also State Infrastructure, and the Second Tanker War in the Arabian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Dr. Tracy's paper is entitled Oman's Strategic Resilience. You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much to the Arab Center for allowing us the opportunity. We pray to Almighty God to grant us all success. Through this paper, I'll try to answer a main question, and that is, how did the Sultanate of Oman manage to safeguard its stability in a region known for its turbulent history, both past and present? I would like to start with posing some questions. Who are our foes and who are our friends in the near future? How can they, when can we decide to join others to face the challenges faced by the world order? Do we have to? Should we place our national interests first, or take into consideration the interest of an international community, which is more often than not based on illusions, like Condoleezza Rice once said. We are part of the Middle East, and if the Middle East is an important part of the world's strategic position, we in Oman are part and parcel of that And from a geopolitical point of view, a country's sensitive position is important in determining that, and to what extent is it subject to other strategic players' interference, and to also its ability to influence the geopolitical situation. There was a number of parameters that determined Oman's tactical and strategic aspects, headed by the military consideration, and Oman tried to be more resilient than other countries in order to protect its national interest and deal with the new developments which are trans-border, and to achieve its national interests. The strategic resilience, we mean by that both the individual and collective ability and the agile defense in response to the 21st century's challenges. And the Sultanate of Oman aims to achieve its national interest and its national will to exercise its influence, to protect its strategic interests, and to have an impact outside its national borders in the following areas. First of all, regarding the strategic resilience in the tactical aspect, and also regarding the strategic resilience. This is based on our diplomacy and our standpoint vis-a-vis international alliances. The military resilience of the Sultanate of Oman is apparent through developing the different aspects of the armed forces and supplying them with the latest cutting edge technologies, and raise standards and training, and to rely on academic military institutions, and to start also in 2020, when a strategic studies academy was established, and also raise awareness in the changes to the international world order and the relations between international powers and the balances of power. And here there are important points which should be mentioned. First of all, the Omani political thought since 1970 focuses on the importance of the struggle over oil and other resources, and Sultan Qaboos has said that in each part of the Arabian lands there is natural resources, especially oil, and undoubtedly this will open the appetite of people from east and west. And also the role of Oman in establishing a kind of a balance. Since 1980, the Sultanate of Oman adheres to its traditions, and also keeping up with modernity. And the founding Sultan Qaboos has said that, and the current Sultan Haytham, has reiterated these principles to achieve the national interests of Oman and the Arab nations. And the requirements of Oman's military doctrine is based on, first of all, at the levels of both animosities and friendships, we consolidate our alliances on the one hand, but also expect that some of these alliances will collapse with the passage of time. And the current world order, the multipolar world order, which will more and more be determined by the latest technologies. And this will mean that reliance on technology will be more prevalent, and the Sultanate of Oman, and through the National Center for Cybersecurity and the National Center for Electronic Warfare and others, is trying to keep up with developments in this regard. Also, the model of criminal justice, which is a number of legislation systems of standing up to crime and combating crime and terrorism. And Oman's strategy is part and parcel of the small country's approach, and the belief that the more we keep our distance from trouble and work for the prosperity of the country, and we want to adopt a model based on criminal justice and the rule of law through crime and punishment, and solving disputes through peaceful means at the international level, and to avoid engaging in direct warfare, in wars, and terrorist organizations. Fourthly, to use economic development to combat financing terrorism. And we know there is a relationship between economic growth and violence, and to work as a country to spread an ideology of neutrality and moderation, and create a balance between security requirements and justice. In the long run, at the strategic level, Oman considers that the leadership, values, and national identity are part of our approach. Of course, we understand that we operate within an international order, and today it's even more apparent than before, and due to the developments in the uh, communications world, and this is known in politics as the interrelatedness, and what happens in one country impacts and, the other, and the country's ability to utilize its resources and to spread that correctly on its strategic requirements. In this light, the state or the Sultanate of Oman is respecting the same old values, traditional values from the 1970s, and considers that as winning cards in its approach. And we adhere to the following principles: the approach based on soft power, and in the 21st century we will be facing many challenges like like drug smuggling, terrorism, violence, cybercrime, etc. And international stability will be facing also with the challenge of ethnical and other conflicts and any terrorist incident anywhere in the world will impact the rest of the nations, and the Sultanate of Oman has been facing up these challenges through a number of principles based on our traditional foreign policy that we can withdraw from and benefit from, the soft power, for example, and also our foreign policy when it comes to national interest and international interest are principles based on peaceful coexistence. Secondly, the principle of rivalry and the principle of creating a balance, and also non-alignment, rejection of double standards, and the details will be included in the paper. And finally, the international alliances and our view in the Sultanate of Oman from a strategic point of view. And when we refer to the statements by the founding Sultan and the current Sultan, we see that Oman has always paid attention to international alliances, especially those who played a role in changing the political map of the Middle East, and had some designs on Oman, and also especially in the period of the Cold War, when the world was divided to two camps, one led by the former Soviet Union, another by the United States, and hence the thoughts of the founding Sultan in his interview with the Lebanese newspaper in 1974, when he confirmed that Oman is against alliances, but we're not against helping and supporting other countries. So the Sultan was rejecting the aggressive kind of alliances against other people, or those or countries who are trying to achieve violent objectives. He did not refer to the peaceful alliances aimed at helping countries, and by help he meant that countries help each other when they stand up with each other on the right of just causes and to achieving their freedom and liberty. So if the friendly countries in different parts of the world are willing to contribute positively to peace, then we'll consider that we are ready to help in a positive way if asked to mediate in the peaceful settlement of conflicts and disputes. And Oman has always been able to change the balances, the military balance in the region, and to choose the principle of positive neutrality. Finally, we reiterate that the resilience of countries and the winning cards should be based on the following. The resilience of small countries start from within. Consolidating the domestic front is the biggest source of front. The resilience of small countries should be based on consolidating compatibility and commercial ties, because that will minimize violence and conflict. Number three, resilience should be based on promoting peace. Number four, the resilience of small countries emanates from the ability of its leadership to solve transnational, transborder conflicts. Finally, if there are to be alliances that small countries should join, then these should be the kind of alliances to enhance AI and technological cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, for abiding by the time allocated. I would like to thank you for your valuable intervention where you talked about strategic flexibility for the Sultanate of Oman. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Khalifa Al-Kuwari, who is going to be with us presenting a paper entitled Cyber Defense of Small Gulf States, the Cases of the State of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. Dr. Khalifa, who is going to be with us. He's got a PhD in international law, international relations and political science from Bradford University. He also serves so his research covers regional cooperation with a concentration on the Gulf countries, and also he concentrates on cybersecurity sovereignty. So the title of his paper, Cyber Defense of Small Gulf States, the Cases of Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. So you have 15 minutes. Thank you very much, Dr. Haider, for the kind presentation. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, I would like to extend my thanks to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. The current world witnesses a pivotal change and transformation when it comes to threats. So traditional spaces are no longer the space where this conflict happens. So the cyberspace has become one of the spaces where we see geopolitical tension. Cybersecurity is one of the modern topics that the GCC countries have perhaps a little bit late understood the impact of such kind of cybersecurity. We have seen the Shimon attack and also the repetition of such attacks is due to the fact that there were some loopholes in this cybersecurity system. And this entails that we have to be serious in dealing with these challenges. And also the GCC crisis in 2017 and the hacking of the Qatar news agency was a pivotal point of change, and this shows the threat that can happen and the impact on national stability. And also during those incidents, I was asking myself, how can this lead to a large political crisis, irrespective of other problems and issues? This had led me to study cybersecurity from the perspective of international law, which was the basis of my PhD thesis about cybersecurity in the GCC. And based on that, building a cybersecurity system that should be comprehensive, should be based on four main pillars in order to face any cybersecurity threats. The first framework is a strategic framework that would entail that we should have the policies and principles and alliances whereby we form a kind of a cybersecurity ecosystem. We have to have a second kind of framework, which is an operational framework where we can respond to any incidents that might arise. The third framework is the technical framework that would analyze any malwares and also to try to carry out any security assessments and also to try to update any digital guidelines in order to limit any challenges and to respond to them. And the fourth framework, which is to have the legal framework and also the policies and criteria that would be leaned on when it comes to any cybersecurity frameworks or warfare. So understanding this framework entails that we should go back to the roots of international law, which is one of the oldest laws worldwide. So this was the tool for the great powers in managing their relations between themselves and also the European empires gave themselves the right to colonize other countries because they think that these nations are not civilized. And with the end of the Second World War and the establishment of the United Nations, we have seen new principles that have been established to put an end to aggression and also the right for self-determination. But this did not put an end to the hegemony of great powers on international law. We have seen new kind of tools that have been established, such as the veto system, and this still gives the right to these great powers to control these ecosystems. So international sphere was not balanced and still not is. If small countries continue with the challenges, economic and other kind of challenges, this is due to this asymmetrical kind of system that we see worldwide. But small countries can reinforce their cybersecurity not only through the latest tools and technologies, but also through the use of international law, whereby the cybersecurity criteria can be envisaged. So also they can participate in forming these kind of ecosystems. These are one of the methods and tools that can be followed in establishing these kind of frameworks, and this would make these small countries much more impactful. The relationship between international law and cybersecurity defense is very important indeed, and there are so many scholarships that concentrate on these two components, the political and military component. International law is not closely or directly related to cyber defense, but in my view, the international law can play a very important role through response and deterrence. And here we'd like to ask ourselves, what are the cyber security activities that should be deterred? There are four categories that should be deterred. The first, the use of force in the cyberspace, any attacks that can be considered armed attacks in keeping with international law, and any acts that constitute any violation of customary law or international law, and also the violation of non-binding kind of views, and also, although these are not binding recommendations, any violation would be a violation of international standards. And also we have some certain acts such as electronic spying. Many countries are not held accountable for such spying, but this is not acceptable from a political perspective, and this entails that we should look into the different challenges. There are differences in terms of the interpretation of certain concepts such as sovereignty in the cyberspace. Some ask for non-sovereign, not to have any sovereignty when it comes to these kind of spaces, and there is another view, which is the view of the majority, and that there should be a sovereignty implied in such kind of spaces. The second difficulty is the difficulties when it comes to the legal and political tools that would enable us to know who stands behind a certain cyber attacks, and also to detect and reveal the capabilities of the countries that stand behind such attacks. There is a limited precedent law or jurisprudence when it comes to this kind of sphere, particularly when it comes to small countries that have not indicated their position vis-a-vis this kind of space, and this would be inimical to their own sovereignty. These countries should move from countries that only receive such kind of technology to effective and practical countries, and we need to reinforce the level of response, and also we have different options available based on the violation question. This leads to another question: how can we respond to cyber attacks in keeping with international law? And also we have a response where we have to carry out due diligence and stop any attack. This entails that countries should not be used in order to impact other countries. And also we have to have a response by imposing punishment in self-defense if there is any use of force or any counter procedures if the attack is not an armed attack, or response in keeping with conventions if there is a convention that indicates the kind of response that should be carried out, and also retaliatory acts that are used, such as diplomatic procedures. So the analysis of this relationship between law and cyberspace, these parties are not only impacted, but these can be also active in coming up with standards and the procedures. These countries should not only passively be on the receiving end, no, they should play a very informed role in developing and reinforcing their cybersecurity to have much and more influence. Estonia is one of the pioneering countries when it comes to cybersecurity. After being subjected to a number of cyber attacks in 2007, they played a very important role as a small state, and their practices impacted other countries such as the state of Qatar and the UAE. Estonia was able to build defense capabilities such as the development of infrastructure, and also contributed to the delineation of international law, and they played a very important role in developing guidelines through the establishment of cybersecurity center that follows NATO, and the experience of the state of Qatar in cybersecurity. This is based on a comprehensive strategy that includes commitment to international principles and the requirements of national security, which aims to achieve a balance between national digital balance and international law. We have developed a national strategy for the year 2024-2030. This is a national cybersecurity strategy that entails that all capabilities should be developed in order to face any increasing challenges that might arise. And in order to guarantee the good implementation of such law, we have seen the establishment of the National Cybersecurity Agency. We have a number of laws and regulations that are issued and that aim also to achieve international cooperation. The state of Qatar reinforced its cybersecurity protection. The state of Qatar during the World Cup was able to protect and establish a resilient infrastructure in order to face any complex cybersecurity attacks. This is not only limited to the development of laws and regulations, but also the use of advanced technologies. The experience of the UAE is an advanced example when it comes to a comprehensive ecosystem where we see international cooperation, and we have legislations and also institutional mechanisms, which makes it one of the most effective countries in terms of cybersecurity regionally. In the UAE, they have a legislative framework that aims to achieve a balance between digital sovereignty and international standards, and they have also a decree 34 of the year 2021 whereby they regulate the combating of electronic or cybersecurity crimes. The UAE has established its national strategy of cybersecurity that happened in February, and in order to guarantee the implementation of these strategies, there has been a central apparatus that is in charge of such kind of apparatus whereby they can do so. Irrespective of the challenges that small countries face, these are not only countries that are on the receiving end of these kind of criteria. And these countries can play a very important role, and they can shine light on cybersecurity governance. Small countries, they can learn from the different strategies and therefore reinforce their own strategy. The three channels that countries can benefit from: they can participate actively in international fora that are relevant to cybersecurity policies, and to build advanced policies that can be kind of legal precedents in international law, and strategic participation with great powers in order to implement the legal principles that should be implemented. Why do these countries need this framework and technical capabilities? International law in cybersecurity is not only formed through the different conventions, but also the practices of countries and technical developments. Countries that have advanced cybersecurity techniques, they have the ability to implement adequately international law, because this would impact the interpretation of law. That is why countries should integrate these techniques with the strategies of the law, whereby these countries would be able to form cybersecurity law and not only abide by it. After the analysis of this cybersecurity ecosystem, these two countries, Qatar and the UAE, can play a very important role in developing the rules of the game through legal and strategic planning and active participation in different activities. Small countries can become countries that not only receive these principles but contribute to the development of such standards and principles. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Khalifa, for your valuable paper. And we're going to continue where you ended. So how are small countries going to become effective in their endeavors? We have our last paper by Rashid Al-Mohanadi, who is going to present his paper entitled "From Buyers to Builders, the GCC's Quest for a Homegrown Defense Industry." So Mr. Rashid, he is seasoned professional in the defense industry and geopolitical risk advisor. He holds a first-class honor degree in electronic engineering from the University of Surrey, a master's degree in defense and security studies from Juan bin Jassim Military Academy, and a master's in critical security studies from the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. He began his career in liquefied natural gas sector, holding multiple roles. He later transitioned to the defense industry, where he played a key role in developing national defense capabilities, in addition to his consulting practices, through which he provides advice and insight to local and international entities. So the title of his paper, "From Buyers to Builders, the GCC's Quest for a Homegrown Defense Industry." You have 15 minutes. Thank you very much. If you can give me the clicker, please. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. I would like to thank the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and the Strategic Studies Units, and my thanks to Dr. Haider. As you can see, the presentation is going to be in English, so you can now listen to the floor.
You had a good lunch. It's not a good position to be in the last session after lunch, so I'll do my best to keep it not boring. So when I was growing up as a kid, in the 90s, 30 years ago, I would have never thought that 30 years later I would come and talk about the national defense industry in Qatar or the GCC defense industry. It was always this thing that was reserved for what we used to call first world countries. So I'm very happy to be discussing this today. I want to discuss something very close to my heart. I've been working in this industry for just under a decade. Very proud that we were able to do what we did in just under a decade. So first of all, why? Why are we here? The gap. What's the gap in the literature? Well, it's a fairly new industry, so there is a lack of research. Data isn't readily available. I just realized the white is a bit too bright. The number of Gulf researchers, very limited. Maybe there is a language gap. Number two, and this is one of my pet peeves, lazy explanations. So because a lot of the research done on the Gulf is Eurocentric, the explanations usually lack depth. So GCC countries have money, they want to be perceived as modern, so they just invest into airlines and defense industries in addition to other stuff, which I think is very annoying in my opinion, and it's very lazy. The GCC exception, using benchmarks, cases, and different methods to analyze the GCC generally, not just the defense industry, isn't easy, because there aren't any similar cases. Countries that never been through industrialization, small populations, large hydrocarbon wealth, relatively new, they've became states as we define it post-1970s, so it's an exception. Last but not least, limited data due to classification, transparency issues, declassification laws, but we were able to collect a relevant amount of data for this research. So what's the question? The question is the push for the Gulf to develop a national defense industry driven by strategic autonomy and economic development, or is it a prestige enterprise? Is it driven just for show? Our hypothesis is that the main drivers are rational and pragmatic, hence, strategic autonomy and economic development. Even though prestige might be a factor, our hypothesis is the main drivers are mostly strategic. So the resources used, because I mentioned one of the issues was the lack of data, open source, government policy documents, national strategies, which there are abundant in the GCC. So introduction. Historically, the GCC, and still is, a big buyer of Western equipment. In the 1950s and 60s, most of the equipment was from the UK. That's why you will see a lot of GCC air forces equipped with Hawker Hunter fighters in addition to other stuff. In the 1980s, the shift became towards more the US, driven mostly by Saudi Arabian defense acquisition cycle, which was huge in the 1980s. And this has created a high dependency on suppliers and OEMs from certain countries. And this is one of the angles we'd like to explore. Recently, the GCC has pushed for more diversification. We see systems introduced from China, non-Western countries, in addition to their own defense equipment. So this is why we're opening the discussion about the drivers behind developing a national defense industry. Also, since the late 90s and early 2000s, economic diversification was and still is a big driver for whatever the Gulf is doing. You can see that in National Visions 2030, National Development Strategies, et cetera, et cetera. And it's important to view the development of a national defense industry from this angle. So this is a slide that took me 3 hours to develop. It's not very pretty, but I'd like to give an overview of the defense industry in the Gulf. So what's there on the ground? We're focusing mostly on state-owned enterprises. There are some private enterprises, but it's very limited. So first, we start with Kuwait. Kuwait does not have a defense company, but they do have a national offset program for defense acquisitions, meaning when Kuwait buys stuff from the market, they get stuff as offsets. But there are reports that the Kuwaiti Armed Forces produces small armed ammunition, which we consider part of the GCC defense industry. Two is Qatar. Qatar took the route of establishing a national defense industrial group. So remember the description, because you will see it a lot. Because Saudi went the same way, and they developed a government-owned defense industrial group. The UAE, the same thing. And the reason is these countries want to centralize the development of the defense industry from MRO, maintenance, ammunition, in addition to other areas. Oman took the light approach, as always, and they've established a government-owned small arms ammunition factory, OMPC. So the only thing they produce is ammunition. So this gives you a high-level overview of what's available, in the defense industrial ecosystem. And it's important to scope what we're discussing. And as an engineer turned consultant, this is one of the models we developed for a certain client, which is called PER, Policy Execution Results. And this is for us to analyze any government initiative. So our scope is mainly on policy. Is the policy rational? Does the policy make sense? And what are the drivers behind the policy? So speaking about drivers, let's delve a little bit deeper into what do we mean by strategic autonomy. And for people in defense academies, and I'm a graduate of very proud of the Joan bin Jassim Defense Academy, the term strategic autonomy is used a lot. And we see this also in the UAE and Saudi. And what is meant by strategic autonomy is the ability of the state to conduct independent operations, secure its security independently from external actors and external stakeholders. So in the end, it all pours into national security. Two is economic development. So and the question is the defense industrial push to develop more jobs, diversifying away from oil and gas? And I have a very interesting slide at the end, which I'm saving. National prestige is basically, is the push non-rational? Is the push, the old lazy explanation of a lot of Eurocentric researchers? GCC has money, GCC wants to appear modern, so they invest into different industries, which you can see that I'm not very for that. So we've analyzed a lot of industrial policy, and the UAE and Saudi offer a big chunk of documentation which you can view. So the picture on the top right is from JAD, which is the General Authority for Defense Development in Saudi. And it's in Arabic, but basically it says in the first 5 years, we're going to put the bases. The next 5 years, we're going to start developing different sectors within the defense industry. And the end, we will have a fully fledged defense industry. In addition to their aspiration to localize 50% of defense acquisitions, which is a very high bar. Underneath, the other picture is from Tawazun Council in the UAE. It's the website. Tawazun is the entity in charge of defense acquisition, R&D, and they call it the economic program, but it's basically the UAE offset program. So what do we notice in all, especially the three big examples, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi? There is a push to nationalize and localize sustainment activities, MRO. The reason is if your tank stops working and you're fully reliant on the OEM or the external supplier, then your tank won't be working in the middle of a conflict situation. So a lot of these countries have tried to localize and nationalize that by establishing sovereign companies or by establishing JVs with external entities. Two, the production of consumables. And this is interesting because you see the reports on Kuwait, you see Oman producing ammunition, Qatar, UAE, and Saudi. All of the GCC countries minus Bahrain produce ammunition, which pushes towards the argument of strategic autonomy. Manufacturing of platforms like land systems, aircraft, naval systems. In the naval domain, the GCC is very successful, especially if you look at the UAE. They've been producing corvettes that are being transferred to Angola very soon. So it's the first example of a defense naval, very high complex system being exported to a country that is not the domestic user. And in addition to other R&D initiatives. So I want to give an interesting example of different embargoes and why is the GCC being pushed to develop that? So you know that Saudi has been under many embargoes. I won't go into the details. The UAE, same thing. Qatar went through the 2017 blockade. It didn't entice direct embargoes from exporters, but it did make dealing with Qatar very difficult for these exporters because they were worried of their big contracts with the other countries. But an interesting example is the 1980s US arms embargo on Qatar. And I don't think a lot of people know about it. So from 1986 to 1990, Qatar was on official defense embargo. And you see the picture on the top. Qatar rejects US demands for return of illicit Stingers. Qatar needed Stingers, the man-pad and anti-aircraft missile. The US rejected the request, so the Qataris bought it off the market, off the black market. The embargo was removed after the Kuwait liberation. But it shows you one of the extracts from the report is United States has little leverage over Qatar, which buys no weapons and receives no military or economic aid from Washington, which is a big support factor for diversification. Because I'm short on time, I'm going to go very quickly. Economic development, there are many arguments for economic development, FDI, transfer of technology and offsets. We have examples from Qatar, ICV, which is in-country value. We have the Tawazun economic program. So all of these policies are pushed towards, developing the economy and providing high quality jobs. So this is a slide I stole from one of my friends, Dr. Frederick. So I added all rights reserved. And it's about what industries should rich hydrocarbon-dependent economies focus on when they want to diversify. And the criteria is economic prosperity, overspill, dual-use technologies, economic harmony, good jobs, because we have a small population. We can't expect everybody to work in a blue-collar job. National concerns, national security, and economic stability. The issue with defense ticks all of these. But the issue with defense is that it's a cyclical industry. So country needs weapons, they buy, then they rely on sustainment, then 10 years later they buy again. And usually countries offset this by exports. We see that in the Korean example where 10 to 20% of equipment is exported, or the French example, which about half of French arms is exported. National prestige, which is the counter argument, very little proof that national prestige is a driver except for extensive media and social media coverage. And the three largest defense expos in the world happen in this region. The World Defense Show in Saudi, DIMDEX in Qatar, IDEX in Abu Dhabi. Even though the strategic value of these defense shows isn't that high, it at least gives us a window into analyzing the defense industrial capabilities of the Gulf. I'd like to end with two slides. Usually, many Gulf researchers would try to benchmark the Gulf against Singapore, Israel, Norway, and I call this unbenchmarkable benchmarks. The reason is these countries developed their defense industry with extensive US support financially, technically, and politically. An example would be the NSM anti-ship missile from Norway, which is about 40% US content. And being a practitioner in the region and in the area and a researcher, I'm sure the US will never provide the same amount of support for various reasons, some of it cultural, some of it political, some of it because we're not a NATO ally. A good benchmark for this industry is, believe it or not, the Gulf Airlines industry, because it's a non-hydrocarbon industry, very successful, provides high quality jobs. Of course, the difference is it has no industrial output, it doesn't make stuff, and doesn't rely on any deep R&D, but it shows that non-hydrocarbon industries can be built, even though cheap hydrocarbon is an enabler for the development of the industry, but it shows you that it's possible to be built. So, to conclude, strategic autonomy, economic development are the main drivers. Prestige is important, but it's not the main driver. And here is me, throwing an arrow in the dark because of global trends, deglobalization, multipolarity, we will only see more investment in the defense industry of the Gulf, but not only the Gulf, even more smaller countries. So I heard in the beginning of today that smaller countries will be weaker and smaller. That might be true, but I think small countries will start developing their own sovereign capabilities at a much higher rate. شكرا دكتور ما قصرت.
Thank you, Mr. Rashid, for this valuable presentation. We have 10 minutes for discussion, questions, and we want to make use of time. We start at 9 o'clock this morning. I suggested that each intervention should not be more than 2 minutes before we give the panelists a chance to respond.
Of the questions to Mr. Al-Mohanadi. But say two questions, but quite a brief. For the first one, you've been talking in general about the Gulf. If we even let aside Light Oman, as you called them, others four, do you see them as the possible industrial alliance where they can organize something of the joint production, smart defense approach? Or in the future you see them more as their competitors, because theoretically they would be playing at the same markets, let's say, and the same fields. They would not produce the new tanks, for example. Yep, they would go with the new innovations. And the second question is about what do you see as a testing ground? Because currently we, especially after the Russian-Ukrainian war, all military industries started to have a phrase, if you didn't test it in Ukraine, you are becoming less compatible, because a lot of the weapons showed on the ground absolutely different situation than what was in the advertisement fairs booklets. So for these four countries, what can be this testing ground for checking the efficiency of these newly developed weapons?
Thank you. تفضل.
شكرا جزيلا على إتاحة.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I wrote down my question to His Excellency the Lieutenant General, but I think the question can include Mr. Rashid Al-Mohanadi. Armament in the literature from a strategic point of view, that the country should rely on its geographical location, the nature of the threats, but there is a disconnect in our literature at the strategic level and the operational and tactical level, even the planning commanders. From your point of view, Lieutenant General and Mr. Rashid, what are the operational standards that you can, like Mr. Rashid has dealt with this at the strategic level, even what you negated about that if you see one country arming itself, then I should imitate that. Or if I see an advanced version of a weapon system, I should immediately buy it. So what are the standards that countries should determine before deciding on these matters? Thank you very much for your presentations. My question is to Dr. Muhammad from the Sultanate of Oman. You talked about strategic resilience and focus on soft power, conviction, neutral alignment, and other aspects. From your personal point of view, how do you assess the strategic resilience when it comes to cyber warfare? A question to Dr. Khalifa. You said that there are 4 frameworks which are necessary that should be adopted by any country to enhance its cyber security, like alliances, the operational framework, etc. In your opinion, what are the priorities that the state of Qatar should adopt to enhance its national security and cyber security, especially in view of the last crisis of 2017?
My question would be to Brother Rashid about his presentation, his hypotheses, the 3 alternative explanations, the third one being the prestige issue. I think you might look at some alternative literatures where prestige is dealt with in a slightly different way, especially even some realist scholarship look at status seeking as an attribute, as an objective of states from a realist point of view. But especially in the case of Qatar, there is a huge literature, as you know, about even the organization of mega sports events. Normally from a very plain point of view, they would look like prestige related, but they can be made strategic, especially the literature on the small states, people like Rory Miller, the way they have been arguing. Even those things that look like very much related to the prestige thing, actually they are part of these states' strategic calculations to make themselves indispensable, like the mediation in the case of Qatar. So the third explanation, I would suggest you to insist on more demanding test to disvalidate. Regarding the strategic autonomy, I mean, in Turkey we also have this same discussion, especially Turkey is considered as one of the good examples of the quest for strategic autonomy in the European context. But the way you framed it sounded more like autarky. Like there is a debate, of course, how to define it. I mean, it's not 100% self-sufficiency, we know that. So, I mean, no country can, in a abstract, pure sense, achieve it if we define strategic autonomy being completely independent of any other ally even. But it's more about your own capabilities plus managing the alliances. So that part of it, establishing the right set of relationships, network alliances. This is also part of the definition of strategic autonomy. I think if, especially in your discussion, I really liked the way Qatar has been restructuring. So look at that angle, how building the right set of relationships in the defense industry can be a multiplier of the strategic autonomy rather than framing it more like in terms of self-sufficiency.
Thank you.
I have a question, only one, but for Monsieur Rashid and Monsieur Talab. Mr. Rashid spoke about the development of industry in a small country. And Talab speak about the difficulty to have something in a small country. Do you think that it will be better to have a cooperation between some small countries or not? And also, I hope that you have an answer for that.
In the Gulf area, yes.
Thank you very much for your presentations. I have also one short question coming from Baltic states. If we are discussing defense strategies, then of course we are talking about what is our enemy, especially from small state perspective. Listening to all of your presentations, it wasn't clear for me what are GCC countries preparing for? What is the enemy? Have you have a profile or any kind of profiling that you have done you could refer to? Thank you very much.
Thank you. خلاص إذا نعود إلى المنصة ونبدأ بنفس الترتيب اللي
Panelists, and we start in the same. Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Talab. The question by brother on armament from a strategic point of view and the standards in building up the defense capabilities, I can reply to this question in two ways. First, the nature of the threat, which can impose on a state a certain type of armament. Will it be of a professional type? Will it be the latest in technology? Will it require, for example, high degree training? And for the next 10 years or so, the operational standards can be built. Secondly, from the tactical level to the operational and strategic level should go through stages. From the beginning of reaching the deal of this weapon, it will take years to build the weapons until they are shipped to you. During this period, there should be a team focusing on training, maintenance. So we started with simple technical, tactical standards until we end up with turning these weapon systems into of strategic importance and operational impact. There was a question on operations in small countries. Yes, small countries in the Gulf need some operational innovations in the case of Kuwait to survive any operational threat. And this depends on the nature of the threat. My final response, the sister who asked us, what are you preparing the Gulf states for who will be your future, or the Gulf countries, since their establishment, the idea, the essence was common defense to protect their national borders and support pan-Arab causes. In the past, we had one enemy, which is Israel, for the Gulf countries. Until now, maybe the same idea applies, but there are conventional or non-conventional threats, and this we leave it to the geopolitical changes. The lady who asked about the Sultanate of Oman's position vis-a-vis the Gulf countries, I only have the official answer from the official site of the Ministry of Transportation. The Sultanate of Oman is considered amongst the best prepared countries according to the standards in 2024 by the International Union, and that is the capacity building, technical, and the Sultanate of Oman, not only at the level of Gulf countries, but at the level, we had 20 points per each point. We had 19 for the legal, 18 for the technical, and 19 for capacity building. Personally, I don't know the position of Oman specifically regarding the Gulf countries, but the information I have is what I got from the Ministry of Communications in Oman. Final piece of information, the lady who asked about where are we and who are our enemies. If we had enemies for the Gulf, the GCC countries, according to international law, countries have rights, very briefly, like the continuity of living in peace, being sovereign and surviving in peace, and other rights. Anybody who threatens one of these rights definitely will be considered as a potential enemy of the Gulf countries. And this does not apply to Gulf countries, but to any country in the international order. The international law has determined these commitments, these rights and duties, and anybody who threatens these rights will be, in the name of international law, an enemy of that state. Thank you, Dr. Khalifa. For cyber defense, this is a system based on different pillars and collectively form an active cyber defense. And because there are multiple sources for the public, it's difficult to determine the points of weakness and defense for small countries like Qatar and the UAE, but according to the classification of the UN, Qatar and the UAE are considered as part of class 1 countries when it comes to cybersecurity. But from my personal point of view, the different frames we mentioned are important and they should be dealt with in parallel without leaving any shortcomings in any of them, because they act collectively and not individually. So for this reason, there is work on developing a cybersecurity system for the Gulf countries. I'll answer my brother's question in Arabic, then I move to English. In continuation of what His Excellency, the Lieutenant General, with all due respect to him, of course, I say from a historical point of view, the armed forces determine the needs and the defense industries produce the solutions and the products. This was okay in the 50s and 60s because most of the R&D took part within the realm of government. But lately, we see that some private sector companies developed technology faster than the government sector. And Dr. King talked about this. He called it the defense tech complex. I think this is the current situation. The need comes from the fighters, the armies, and those who produce technology. تلقيت 3 أسئلة متشابهة سأجيب عنها مرة واحدة، دفعة واحدة، حول التعاون الصناعي داخل منظومة. طبعا 15 دقيقة ليست كافية الحديث عن كل شيء. نرى أن هناك 3 بلدان رئيسية، السعودية والإمارات وقطر، وقعت فيما بينها اتفاقيات دفاع، قطر والسعودية في 2022.
Actually, 2 weeks ago, 1 week ago. So we're seeing that, but the question is how quick will that translate into actual cooperation? And I think it's a matter of a few years. And the last question to my dear friend in Qatar University about definitions. And people always sweat on definitions. I am talking about this from a defense and securities studies point of view. In the IR arena, prestige means something specific, but the contribution I'm trying to make is in the defense and studies, and there is a clear definition for what strategic autonomy is. There is a clear definition to other stuff. So, for example, strategic autonomy means operational dependence. One of the factors. Can I, conduct my operation independently from external factors? With prestige, you mentioned sporting events, but I think, we're not comparing apples to apples. Or is it more apples to oranges? So a sporting event is something you do once, and you do once every 4 years. When you develop a new industry, you have to make sure that it still has business. Sporting event, you do it one and khalas, in Arabic we say, but when you develop an industry, you need to make sure there is supply, there is demand. So I think it's a bit different, but it's an important point to look at definitions. So shukran. Marcus.
فشكرا لكم. Thank you very much to all our panelists, and thank you for your contributions. And we've come to the end of this session and today's proceedings. We had a valuable session on the Gulf countries. So today is over. We resume tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and in this very room, and may God bless